Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. It looks like we're ready to get started. Welcome to today's discussion. No more data for data's sake. Say goodbye to white noise and hello to helpful reporting. We're going to have a fun and hopefully informative panel discussion with the best of the best in customer success. Adam Waid from Emotive and Clark Dixon from Xperity. Two Atlanta locals on with us, which rarely happens. We're lucky to have them both here with us today. Our goal is to put an end to data fatigue. Some of the things we're going to cover today include moving past vanity metrics to focus on the data that matters for customer success, how to break down interdepartmental barriers that are holding your organization back, and of course, getting executive buy-in. But before we jump in, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. Number one, this discussion is being recorded. We will send out the recording via email tomorrow. It's also going to be available on our YouTube channel and on our website. And lastly, if you have any questions for our panelists, please type them into the Q&A little box at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to be monitoring them along the way, but we do have time set aside at the end for Q&A, and I would love to get everyone's participation, so I urge you not to be shy. We will begin with some introductions. My name is Maria Gay. I am the digital marketing specialist here at UserIQ. And at UserIQ, our mission is to give customer success teams the power to predict outcomes and impact company growth with the most intuitive, action-oriented platform on the market. I'll be facilitating the discussion today. Next up, we have Adam Waid. Adam is the Chief Customer Officer at Emotive. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your current role?
Sure. I wear black every day, all day. That is a little bit of something about myself now. I have the privilege of building the post-sales team here at Emotive. Emotive, we help e-commerce brands grow and manage their entire customer journey. So this is my first time fully submersing myself in e-commerce space, and it's been a great year so far.
And Adam, you've had a very impressive career from what I've seen. I'm interested to know, how did you move from the marketing side of things and into customer success? Did it feel very natural to you?
Yeah, thank you. It's been it's almost 20 years now. So the first 13 years of my career I spent on marketing agency side. I was very privileged. It was such a fun time in my career. I got to work with brands like the Weather Channel, the NBA, the White House during the Obama years. And a mentor of mine worked at Salesforce and actually led the marketing cloud. And so he had asked if I could come over and help build the customer success team there, which was basically talking to marketers about how to optimize their strategy. So that's how I started cutting my teeth on the post-sales side, did that for 3 or 4 years, then went and built SalesLoft, their post-sales team. They just got acquired by like 2.1 billion, I believe. And then been in Emotive now for a year.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
We're very lucky to have you here today, Adam.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Clark Dixon. Clark is the Director of Client Success Operations at Xperity. Clark, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Xperity?
Yep. Hey, everyone. Clark Dixon. Currently at Xperity, we're an urgent care focused electronic health record company. So software and services focused on the urgent care, the acute care space in healthcare. I currently lead and am building out the CS operations team, which is part of our RevOps organization. Basically, I partner with the post-sale leadership, so client success, implementation, and customer support, and provide them with everything from enablement to process to data and technology to help them do what they do best.
The perfect person to have for this discussion today.
Yes, he's really the star of the show, to be perfectly honest.
Clark's the star of the show.
Yes.
But Clark, I do want to ask, so you have an interesting background. I think from what I saw, you started in neuroscience at Furman. Do you think your scientific background, your analytical mind, is that what led you to the operations side of things in CS?
You know, so I mean, looking back, like the pieces, they line up really nicely, but I never sought that out. It just kind of naturally happened with the things that I was interested in doing. So I did. I studied neuroscience, was really involved in doing research, wanted to get my PhD and, do research on various topics, but it was very data driven and process. I mean, anyone who's done scientific research knows you do the research, gather literature, have a hypothesis, something you want to test, document, you test. Data is extremely rigorous. So a lot of those kind of common motifs are also found in ops. I kind of went through a different route though. While trying to get into a lab to get my PhD in Atlanta, got my foot in the door at a early stage startup, and that was kind of it. And I didn't look back. It was too much fun building something out. And it was very similar to research, just in that you're building something new and forming hypotheses and testing as you go. So I did that and kind of just climbed the ranks, starting as a CSM, an individual contributor. So I've done support, I've done CS, I've done implementation, and just kind of as I kind of grew into that role, I was leading a small CX team at another healthcare startup, in a really similar space. And a lot of my role was focused on ops, trying to do more with less team just because of budget. And then I just it gravitated naturally into an ops focused role. So yeah, I mean, looking back, things line up nicely, but no, I never sought out ops. It worked. I'm happy that the role exists and it's growing at a pace that kind of lines up naturally with where I'm at in my career.
Well, we're very happy that you wound up where you did. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. It should be noted too, Maria, Clark is not feeling well and he rallied himself to be on this webinar.
I do want to point that out.
It was going to be a very boring chat with just me.
I'm on day 2 of COVID. And it is brutal. So I'm drinking some coffee and water. So if you see me drinking like 8 different fluids over here, it's just trying to keep myself going for an hour before I go back to sleep.
Yeah, we're extremely grateful for you powering through. You're an absolute champ. So
I didn't want to.
We very much appreciate you. But thank you both for joining us today. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody we are going to do Q&A at the end. So anytime we're talking about something that pops into your mind, hit the Q&A button, submit it, and we'll get to it at the end, I promise. But let's get into it. So I recently saw a quote from Chris Hicken. He is the CEO at Nuff Said. Some of you may know him, follow him on LinkedIn. And it read, "The future of customer success will require leaders to spend less time on running a better success team and instead focus on using customer data to run a better company." And I really thought it was the perfect example of what we're seeing in the industry right now. Leaders are shifting focus and placing greater importance on CS ops roles, and investing in business analytics tools for their teams. And Clark, as an ops director yourself, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I appreciate the sentiment in that quote, and that we should be focusing heavily on better data to drive our decisions as an organization. I don't see it as an instead necessarily. I think it's something that, as we see a rise in CS ops in the same way that we've seen marketing ops and sales ops, in respect to those organizations, I think that if anything, we should see CS leaders spending more time leading strong CS teams, because they have to spend less time doing data maintenance and organizing tools and keeping up with vendors and all that stuff, because they have someone else dedicated for those functions. So I think that I appreciate what he's trying to say with that, but there's CS ops is here for a reason, and data isn't a magic bullet either. So we, people like myself, we can deal with the vendors and the tech stack and the process and the data, but then ultimately it's our job to package it up and give it to people like Adam, who can develop the strategy and lead the team, and act on that data in a meaningful way.
Awesome, 100%. And Adam is someone who sits on several advisory boards and is a pro at helping SaaS companies grow. What are your thoughts? Have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, look, the bottom line is, I don't know everyone's role that's on this call, but if you're touching post-sales or data for post-sales, you are arguably one of the most important voices at the table. Churn, MRR, growth, expansion, all of those are huge metrics that every investor and every board looks at. And so I'm kind of a straight shooter. My goal for today is just that each of you walk away with a little more boldness, a little more sense of urgency of kind of demanding the data that you need in order to, one, have a voice at the table, because you should, and two, and I mean this kind of tongue in cheek, but also seriously, taken seriously at the table, because you are giving the organization the data that it needs to make educated decisions.
Absolutely fantastic. So we're going to get into the meat of it. Like Adam said, we want you guys to walk away with something that you can implement as soon as possible. So Clark, I'm going to start with you. From your perspective, what are the metrics CS leaders need to be laser focused on in 2022 and why?
So I think that a lot of these metrics are largely the same as is kind of the core metrics that we haven't deviated from in the past several years. And obviously, MRR, churn, sentiment to a degree, but all the things that we've been tracking for the most part are still relevant. I think that we'll see an increased relevance in things like cost to serve. I think that's kind of my prediction as we move towards more of a tech touch driven industry and seeing better tools, better insights, things like that. I don't see the CS role going anywhere, but I do see an increased reliance on the data and the technology, which would then mean that we want to do more with less, right? So cost to serve, I think, would be important. And then just kind of going back to the basics with ROI. Are we delivering on what we promised during the sales cycle? And that is, partially it should be a metric, but it kind of depends on the team. But I think just going back to the basics, ROI is the big one, and then just having good quality health tracking, whether that's a score or just individual metrics, whether it's based on product data, in-app usage, feature adoption, things like that are always still relevant. But simply, I think ROI and cost to serve are two of the big ones that I'd like to see a focus on.
I like that. Back to the basics. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and the question is, what are the most important metrics?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so look, I think there are so many important metrics that post-sales has to keep track of. You have CAC, you have adoption, you have churn, you have CSAT, you have touch points and QBRs, NPS, expansion, MRR, all that stuff, which can be overwhelming and candidly not weighted equally. But if you're a CS leader on this call, your job is to move the bottom line of the business by ensuring that customers are getting the most out of the platform that you work on. So my first thing would be to get with the executive leadership team and see which of the most important business metrics are on fire. Is it churn? Is it CAC? Is it growth or expansion? I would first start there, because if you're focused on certain areas of the business and the other business metrics that your board and your investors care about are not being tended to, there's always going to be tension. And so I would start there. I would start with your executive team. But at the end of the day, customer value that they're getting from your platform trumps all that, because that will improve churn and adoption and stuff.
Customer value trumps all. I like that. So on the other side of things, is there anything y'all want to see hit the road? Do you consider something to be a vanity metric that's not providing any real value? Clark, for example, do you ever have to report on something you think doesn't serve the greater good?
Unfortunately, yes, I do. Yeah. And I think that there are some metrics that are likely considered vanity metrics just industry-wide, right? Like things that people focus on that maybe we shouldn't focus on. But then I would argue that there are certain things that might just be vanity metrics for your org because of the way that you're gathering the data or flawed methodology. So for example, I've seen in the past NPS has kind of been a big one that I think we as an industry put a lot of emphasis on NPS. And I have nothing against NPS at its core, but I think that it's also largely dependent on just good survey methodology and just collection practices. And then making sure that you're pulling the correct insights from it. So, in the past, I've seen, we've delivered NPS in-app, which is great. I think it's an awesome way to reach customers, but it also misses the people who are not in the app, which for, in healthcare is often our executive stakeholders and the decision makers. So we have all this great NPS data. We have a lot of data points, but none of them pertain to our decision makers, which is an issue. Conversely, it could go email based, which is great too. You reach a lot of people who are in email, but again, in our industry, we have a huge portion of our customers who are not in email regularly. That would be, nurses, front desk staff, things like that. So I think companies I've worked with in the past have put a lot of emphasis on NPS as kind of this driving metric that determines our health of our customers. And then, when you dig into the data, we're not actually capturing a relevant or all-encompassing data set that I think can be extremely misleading. So I think that's, I've never necessarily had a report on something where I just feel like the metric in its core is just totally flawed. But I think that as you dig into a lot of what we're reporting, it's just important to be mindful of the way in which you're getting the data, because I think anything could be a vanity metric if you're not, very deliberate and careful in how you're collecting it.
All right, I'm going to be controversial. Yeah, as much as it can be. Look, I don't care anything about CSAT.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's not a board metric that we go after. It is not something that I think it can be helpful at times to see if there are consistent underperforming individuals, right? That has maybe a bad customer facing attitude or doesn't answer questions the right way or whatever. But like when a leader brings to me just the CSAT ratings, one, CSAT responses are relatively low in general across the board. And two, the customer could have been frustrated with the product, but they rated the CSAT low. So, or they could just be really good friends with the person that's serving them. They have a good relationship and they're not being honest. So CSAT, got to go.
Interesting. Very interesting. So Clark, you say that it's not necessarily the metric NPS, but maybe it's the avenue in which we retrieve the information and how heavily some organizations rely on it. And Adam says,
I think that I agree completely with Adam. While I don't necessarily think that CSAT has to go, I think that we just have to be very careful and deliberate in how we're using it, because exactly what Adam said. I mean, it's really any survey-based or NPS, CSAT, any of the other survey-based like customer sentiment scores. I mean, they're all lagging anyways. So I mean, if a customer is unhappy enough to give you a poor rating on one of those, they've likely been unhappy for a while. And like Adam said, there's lots of other, I might give someone a high score just because I like the CSM that I'm working with. I'm personally guilty of that, where like I am not a huge fan of the tool, but I love the CSM in the company and I give them a great score.
I think we're pretty sure we've all been guilty of that at least once.
And I live and breathe this stuff, and I know it's impactful, and I'm guilty of it myself. So I personally am not a huge fan of any of the survey-based like sentiment stuff. It is what it is. I report on it because it's still important to leaders in my organization. And I think as long as it's important to them, it's my responsibility to make sure that we're at least capturing the data and using it in the most impactful way possible. But yeah, I agree. I think if we had to get rid of anything, it'd be all of the customer sentiment-based scoring stuff.
Well, thank you both for sharing. I appreciate that. Adam, before we move on, are there any other data points you've seen when you stepped into a new role at a company? You think this is wrong, we're focusing on the wrong thing, or is it really just mainly CSAT that?
I mean, look, I've helped build a number of post-sales organizations, and I think everyone kind of starts off with metrics that don't end up moving the bottom line of the organization, because sometimes they just don't have enough data and they just report on what they can. But here's the thing. Sentiment based, like Clark was saying, is not a metric that the board cares about. And as CS leaders, you need to be thinking about what the investors and the board cares about, candidly, right, at the end of the day. It's great to share those types of things with the team and rally the team and all hands, but like that should not keep you up at night. So if you're basing a lot of your things based on CSAT and responses, you're missing a huge piece. And actually, you're probably not going to be taken as seriously in the business as you should be. And I know that's harsh. I'd say I'm kind of a direct kind of.
We like it. Awesome. Well, thank you both for that. So moving on, and speaking of sentiment, my next question was around sentiment. But when I say sentiment, I mean CS or CSM sentiment. How do you factor in intuition when it comes to measuring customer data from your side of things? Is the overall analytical outcome a combination of hard numbers and gut feelings, or is it just those hard numbers? Clark, we'll start with you.
So similar to what I said with NPS and CSAT, I think I wouldn't discount it entirely because I think that CSM sentiment has its place. I think that just like NPS and CSAT, you have to be very careful with how you're using that data. I think the ultimate goal should be to have a very objective health score where you're collecting really predictive metrics, whether that's in product data, like, product usage, feature adoption, things like that. Support tickets, all those things that might be a bit more predictive than a lagging like sentiment metric. That being said, we actually rely fairly heavily on CSM sentiment in our current health score. It actually takes up 30%, which is a massive percentage of our health score. A few reasons for that. But for us, it's partially to help shore up some gaps in places where we have no data available or we just have difficulty collecting the data. So for example, in healthcare, one of the biggest threats to our MRR is consolidation in healthcare space, things like that, mergers, acquisitions, which they can be difficult to pull in very objective, proactive metrics on those things. So we kind of lump some of that into our subjective scores. Like if you've caught wind of customer X getting acquired by customer Y and customer Y is using our biggest competitor, we're likely going to lose that business. So some of that we're kind of using is a Band-Aid of sorts. And the ultimate goal would be to decrease the percentage that we rely on sentiment. But I think it has its place in a customer health score. Again, just being very careful with how you use it.
Yeah. So in your organization, you rely fairly heavily on that kind of, you might not have another option at the moment.
I hope I'm not coming across as like a negative Nancy, because I love the CSMs. They're crucial to the business, but I think that CSM sentiment scoring is really only helpful proactively. If a customer is already at risk, but the CSM is like, oh, but they love us and they've said nothing but great things about us, that really is useless at that point. And so what I would encourage is a sentiment based on, is the customer growing? Is the customer using? And do they have executive relationships with the decision maker? And that's how I would score whether or not the CSM feels good about that account. If they're just talking to the main point of contact who is, not a decision maker, and they're just using the basic functions of your software, like the CSM sentiment should not be great. And so that's the way I think about it. It's only helpful proactive, and if they have certain key metrics or key criteria that they're grading the sentiment on.
I would also add that with sentiment, it is extremely important to just be very rigid in your criteria as an organization. Like you can't just give CSMs freedom to just say, hey, go just customer, because you're going to end up with a million different criteria for what that means. So having a very, very rigid, this is on a scale from 1 to 10, this is what a 2 would be, this is what a 3 would be, leave very little room for, I don't want to say subjectivity because it is a subjective score, but you want to have something very concrete that CSMs can rely on, and you want that scale to be driven largely on churn risk or risk of losing MRR rather than happiness. Because like Adam said, you can have someone that's very happy, that's not using the product, it's not meeting their needs, and that can be extremely deceiving if you are judging that sentiment score and relying heavily on that sentiment score, and that sentiment score is based on customer happiness. Then you could really do some damage if you're not careful.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I just would double click on that for just a moment. For all of you that are leading CS organizations, you need to be able to give the CSM guidelines on how to score based on churn risk, because it is very different in everyone's mind. And so that's why I'm like, you base it on like growth of adoption, expansion of other things, and then executive relationships. To me, like there could be arguably other things as well, but if you have those things, if the customer is using and they're growing in other areas of your platform, and you have good relationships, or your executives have good relationships with executives at your customers, that is relatively a safe place to be like, we're moving forward. Not to say you take your eyes off of it, but yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. We're going to move on from sentiment. And finally, the last portion of this first topic, let's talk about baselines for just a minute. If someone is in a leadership role, a CS ops role, and they're just getting started, how should they go about defining those baselines? Clark, I'll start with you because, well, you're the data king.
Data king, I like that. I mean, first and foremost, when you come into a new role, you got to take stock of what you have, right? So you got to see what tools you have available, what metrics are currently tracking. And then I would say right off the bat, aside from just understanding what makes up all of those metrics and data points and make sure that you're comfortable with the conditional logic and the filters and all that good stuff that kind of makes up a metric, you got to start logging things in like a trackable way. So having something that is like a snapshot in time so you can start trending data, right? So I think that is one of the things that I came into in building out the CS ops role at Xperity was that we had a lot of really great data, but we did not have a lot of good trended data. So one of the first things I try to do is just start pulling snapshots out of Salesforce and our CS tool, our support tool, start pulling things together and just storing them, essentially data warehousing. And so that is one of the first things I would do, because you really, as you build out better reporting functions and better data collection and things, you're going to wish that you had metrics from 6 months ago or a year ago to compare to. And if you're not actively doing that, I would just start now. You can do that in Excel. You can do that in it doesn't have to be fancy. We transparently have been doing a lot of this in Excel for a very long time. It is held together with duct tape and rubber bands, but it's still working, and we're working very quickly to get things into Snowflake and have a much more robust kind of data engine. But yeah, that's my biggest piece of advice would just be start storing data immediately. And then from there, go into doing some more investigation on what you can get in terms of baseline data, but just collect everything you can up front and go from there.
Very sound advice. Thank you, Clark. Adam?
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna, again, kind of counterpoint here with Clark. I agree at some point you need to take a baseline, but if you're just starting out in the organization as a leader, whether in ops or in post-sales, again, your goal is to ensure that you have a voice at the seat of the table. So you have to understand what are the biggest gaps or the things that are not working right now that the executive team cares about. Because if you start going on an expedition of CSM touch points and how many emails they've sent, how many calls they've made, but like commercial churn is out of control, you are going to be pressed in every single meeting that you go to, and your voice it will be harder for you to get the resources that you need. So if you start with your CFO, your financial folks, and you say, like, what are the biggest burning areas that are on fire right now in my org? Start there and then dive into that just a little bit. And then from there, you can break out into what has caused that and look at some of the other metrics. But I would start with what is the biggest fire in the business.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, guys, we are going to move on. But before we move on to topic number 2, I'm going to do a super quick poll. I'm going to release it now. I'm going to give everybody like 40 seconds to vote. It's a statement, very simple. My company's data is currently siloed and not visible across the organization. Is that true for you, or is it false? We're just going to get a quick idea of where everyone currently stands on the call. We're going to be diving into breaking down silos in just a second. So it's good for us to see what position you guys are in. And like I said, we'll give it about 30 seconds. We'll look at the results.
I love watching it in real time.
I know, this is great. 50-50.
It is 50-50. Let's see, we'll give it 3 more seconds. I think everyone's voted, so. Okay, guys, I'll share the results, but you heard us say it ended in 50.
Yeah, sorry, I spilled the beans.
No, that's okay, that's okay. 50-50, I wanna know, Clark, did these results surprise you?
Not really. I mean, I think that It's probably on par with what I expected. I think there's some orgs out there that are doing a great job of keeping things really seamless across each business unit, and then I think there are some that are still working on it. So yeah, this lines up.
Real quick, are you guys seeing my screen? The presentation still?
Yes, that's polling time.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Adam, anything you want to add real quick before we?
No, I think 50-50 is not surprising. I actually thought it would be more siloed than 50-50, but I think a bigger question would be, is the data that you have moving the bottom, like, is it impactful across the business?
Okay, well, let's get into it. Let's talk about these barriers. I'll start with what siloed data is and why it's a bad thing. Clark, in your own words, what does it mean to have data silos in an organization?
I think data silos appear when you have each business unit owning the collection, aggregation, storage, and reporting of their individual data points and metrics. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing for each business unit or org to own their collection or responsibility of a data point at a specific point in a customer's journey or business lifecycle. I think where you get into trouble is when you have very segregated storage, reporting, aggregation of data points. I think that it's natural for sales to own sales data in the sales process, marketing to own their data, early on, CSMs to own their data post-sale. It's natural, it makes sense, and it's probably the best way to go. But where you really get into trouble is when each of those have their own, storage methodologies or aggregation methodologies where you're kind of storing and reporting on things in your own way, and maybe you're excluding certain things from CS reporting and others from sales reporting, and then you're comparing apples to oranges, and that can be dangerous, just in that a lot of big decisions are based on that data. So having a nice streamlined governing body over that data set, again, whether it's the collection, aggregation, or storage of and reporting on that data, it's important to have kind of a team that sits outside of those silos to own that process, which is the point of breaking down silos.
Thank you, Clark. And Adam, what do you think siloed data prevents you from achieving?
I think siloed data prevents you from actually working together as an organization, as one team unit. For example, if your operations or your data team is going off and collecting data about your department, and you don't hear about results until you're in a meeting with everyone, you don't have time to process or digest or create the strategy based on the data, it's just kind of presented with everyone there. Like, that's a silo, and nothing drives me crazier than just a little bit of blindsided data dumps. I want to partner with my operations team. That's the type of culture I create, is just more kind of, I don't make decisions without them, but my ask of them is to not tell data to the organization without my buy-in first of what's going on. Not to hide anything, but like, I don't want to be on my foot in a meeting trying to explain why data points are. I want to be able to understand it first. So that is where silos can really cause friction internally.
Thank you, Adam. And so if we know why they're bad, how do we put an end to it? Clark, I think you touched on it a little bit in your answer, having somebody that sits outside of that data, but please.
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, it's a newer function, but RevOps, revenue operations, fairly new role in, within the past, probably less than a decade. But I think it was kind of born out of sales ops, marketing ops, but it's essentially a team that is designed to sit out of the organizational silos of the revenue organization. And that's the team that I sit on at Xperity. So within RevOps, we have our sales ops, marketing ops, CS ops, CRM team, contracting, credentialing, all that good stuff that kind of keeps things moving. And aside from just the operational benefits of having the team can own the tools and the process and all of that, I think the biggest piece is owning the data, because sitting outside of those silos can kind of take ownership over everything that we're reporting on, make sure that we are reporting things consistently, that we're designing our data engine to accommodate all the teams that we support. So sales might need things a certain way, but we need to make sure that it accommodates the CS team and the finance team downstream. So we're able to kind of have like a big picture view over all the data processes and keep things really clean. And I think that helps. We don't necessarily own the data, as I think everyone individually has a responsibility to own a data set and keep things clean and organized. But we have kind of governance over that data, where we can keep things organized, put rules in place, put best practices in place, enable the team to track things correctly and things like that. So I think the rise of RevOps is going to be hugely beneficial to organizations in breaking down data silos.
I like that, the rise of RevOps. It sounds like an installment in a.
It sounds very cool, right?
It sounds very cool.
Are you teasing out the next webinar?
I like, it's a good idea. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so if you're on this call and you have siloed data in your team, or if you're a leader, regardless, whether you lead the organization or you're just on this call and you report to someone who leads the organization, it is your responsibility to break down the silo. Do not complain about organizational silos without trying to break them down. And the way that you break them down is really easy. It's just making sure that you are all unified under one common goal. For leaders here, or you can suggest to your leaders, remember that the RevOps team have a lot of things going on as well. So one, make sure you're praising them and unifying around one common goal. Tell them what your focus is and your problems are that you need to solve, and get their help and buy-in. Don't treat them like an admin. And then bring them into every single discussion. Just like I said, I don't want to be blindsided by decisions. The data team doesn't want to be blindsided with a bunch of requests that were discussed in an offsite, and then you come back and just dump on them things that they need to do. You bring them in. In fact, I say all the time, I truly do not make decisions without my RevOps or CS ops person guiding me on that decision. It's that important. And so if they're not involved in your plannings, if they're not involved in your weekly meetings, if you're not getting their input on the direction, then you are actually causing silo in your organization as well.
I appreciate that, Adam. That's RevOps is only as good as the leaders that bring us into conversation, and we need, oftentimes if we're brought in too late, we could have offered insight or advice to things that we're already working on that could be beneficial. I think that's a huge part of the RevOps function, is just creating alignment and just making sure things are communicated internally, because more often than not, we're all working towards the same thing. And we likely already have what leaders need, or already working on it from another business unit. So it's beneficial to everyone to keep those teams involved.
So here's a takeaway for everyone that's on the call. Whether you're the leader or you can go back and tell your leader, you should start this week or next week and break down those silos. Invite your operations team or your data team into every single thing that you do. They don't have to join everything, but you see them, if they're not reporting to you, you see them as an extension of your team, an extension of your leadership team, and treat them as so. And just like every human, they want to be appreciated. We all want to be appreciated. And that will begin to build relationships and break down silos.
Very good advice. Thank you both for that. We're going to move on to technology a little bit. Clark, I want to ask you, what role does technology play for you in reporting and analytics? Is your organization using a business intelligence tool? I know you said that you're working a lot on Excel right now, and I'm sure that most people on the call might be as well. Do you find yourself piecing together information from different data pools? Do you have a single source of truth? How do you work through that?
So we are a Salesforce shop. We live and breathe out of Salesforce. We do our best to keep everything integrated with our CRM. That being said, there's obviously disparate data sources, and you kind of make do with that. Some tools don't integrate, some you don't necessarily need to. But for the most part, we are living and breathing out of one tool. We still piece things together externally outside of that, and I think it's important to have some other, whether it's a data warehouse or just some place where you are keeping and storing data outside of your CRM. If anything, just for trending data and tracking data, redundancy. We're actively moving towards building out a data warehouse for the revenue team, internal teams. We currently use Snowflake with our product team, and the goal is to have everything in one place so that we can start blending, really good product data with sales data and marketing data, finance, and get all of that into one place in a really smooth, streamlined way. And then on top of that, we'll use Tableau. So we currently use Tableau. The problem with Tableau, and not necessarily Tableau as a vendor, but BI tools in general, they're only as good as the data that they sit on top of. So our biggest focus right now is just getting really clean, organized data in a retrievable, digestible format. And that, I think, is the biggest hurdle. You can stick a really powerful BI tool like Tableau on top of Salesforce directly, or just CSV or something, but it's really just going to be a fancy graph to show you data that you could just visualize in Excel. So I think that's the biggest piece. If you're going to utilize technology, just make sure that it is the foundation is sound before you start investing heavily into something like BI, because those tools are really expensive. But yeah, we use Excel. I would consider myself an Excel wizard. I love Excel. I think that is, as I'm building a team under me, the one thing that I would love to keep doing is, keeping my hands on a keyboard with Excel, just because I find a lot of joy in it. So,
oh my gosh, he's total RevOps.
Yeah,
I was something that's never come out of my mouth.
And neuroscience. You can see it all coming out now.
Oh yeah, no, I love Excel. I think it's way more powerful than anyone gives it credit for. You can do all of your data collection, aggregation, storage, reporting all in one place. And it's a good tool to prove out your concepts and prove that you need more robust data engines and reporting tools. So I think it's good for a period of time.
I figured out how to do conditional formatting recently and change the color of a cell. So does that count?
Yeah, I mean, I'd put you up there with like the sum crowd or
the sum crowd.
Nice, nice. Yeah, look, I want to echo what Clark said here. It can be tough for all of us very fast-paced leaders that just want to create a tool or implement a tool and just have it all fixed. But the bottom line is everyone knows this: crap in, crap out. If your data is bad, no platform is going to make your data better. In fact, it's just going to compound the issue. So I would highly encourage you, and if you have to propose for resources or whatever, I would highly encourage you to pause and spend some time cleaning up the data, making sure that there's data integrity. And you propose that back to the organization by saying, here are the things that we're wanting to track, and here are the reasons why we can't track it. So we're going to take the next 6 weeks and we're going to clean up our data so that we can run faster later.
Very good advice. Did that at a previous organization. We hired temps or contract workers to come in and really focused on cleaning up our data, because you're right, doesn't matter the platform, crap in, crap out. Okay. So last question I'll ask about this, Clark, what do you think, in your words, is the biggest threat to the health of your data? Company culture, lack of prioritization, technology issues? Is it a combination? Just like to hear your take.
Yeah, so I think we are at Xperity, we're in a really good spot where we have amazing buy-in from leadership and all the teams that we work with. And we have some great leaders that really support RevOps and our team. So I don't think company culture is really an issue for us in regards to data. We do have some technological limitations, which, they don't necessarily prevent us from doing what we need to do, but they add some extra work. So that's one piece. But I would say the biggest for us, the biggest limitation is probably around data process. we have a lot of data points that are coming and going from automated sources. Some are manual, or things are people are entering things into our CRM at different points in time. And if you look at something like contact or account data, everyone's tracking data on their accounts and their CRM, whether it's product usage or MRR or contacts, email addresses, things like that. Really basic stuff that can really bog you down later on if you don't have good data in those places. And those are also fields where you have at any point in time, marketing might own it, sales might own it, CSMs might own it, support touches it. And those data points change hands, depending on the organization, 5 to 7 times by the time a customer is fully live. So it's really important to have really good process, really good rigidity around who owns what data at what point, who's responsible for that data. And I think that it's helpful to have some higher level governance around who does that. But I think it comes down to enabling the team, educating the team on how to add, the fields that they need, how important it is, and then just making sure you have a clean process around, things like people leaving. That's kind of everyone's going to lose customers, and if you don't have a good churn process in place, you can do some damage later on with missing documentation. Marketing might still send out emails to things that weren't properly updated. So there's a lot of just that basic stuff that you don't necessarily think about all the time. That can be really important just to make sure you have good process and education around. So I think for us, that's our area of focus, is just making sure that we clean those things up.
Awesome. Very well said. Thank you, Clark. We are going to move on to the last topic because we are running against the clock here. So all this work means nothing if you can't get your executive leadership team to buy in, right? So I want to start by asking the two of you, and I'll start with you, Clark, but what do you think, or who do you think, I apologize, a CS ops role should report to in an organization, and why? And the reason I ask this is I would imagine reporting to the wrong executive might not get the attention and budget CS needs or deserves. For example, if they report to a CRO, did the needs of sales and marketing supersede customer success? Am I totally off base here? What do you think?
I think it largely depends on the size of your organization. I think if you're a smaller company, it probably makes sense to keep CS ops rolled up under CS, so that you make sure that you have a CS leader looking out for that ops role, making sure you have budget for it, making sure you have the tools and things that you need. I personally, our RevOps team actually rolls up to the CRO. And for us, we have a RevOps team of, I think we're more than 15 at this point. So we're a pretty well baked out team. We have great RevOps leadership, and we have a great CRO that appreciates what we do and really supports us. And then we also have, our Chief Customer Officer, who I work closely with, is we have great relationships with him. So he's very supportive. So I think for us, it doesn't really matter because we have such great support from everyone on the executive leadership team that we don't really have problem getting budget or headcount or anything that we need. But I imagine early on, it is probably more important to have that kind of tucked under CS.
Adam, what do you think? Does it vary depending on the organization?
I may be the wrong person to ask. I mean, I think earlier in my career, I was like, everyone should report to me. Marketing, everyone. But the reality is look, just like Clark is an expert here, I am not a RevOps expert. I know what I want. I know the data that I want, but I can't actually coach them and give them career advice and challenge them in certain ways that someone that is truly operations leader can. I think if you're worried about there being a lack of focus on your team's priorities, I think you need to be bolder as a leader and share exactly what's going on and why you need, and make sure that you get the resources that you need. And then I do think, candidly, at some point, all operations should be under one org. It should be.
Okay.
Yeah, I think as long as ops is together, I don't know that it matters as much who it ultimately reports under, as long as it is seen as one cohesive unit. We are RevOps, we are partnering with everybody. It's not necessarily CS ops, marketing ops, sales ops. Like, we are the RevOps team. I personally have my focus on CS ops, but as long as we as a RevOps team have support from the executive leadership team, we operate fairly independently anyways. So I don't think it matters too much.
All right, well, thank you. So finally, as CS leaders, how are the two of you leveraging your analytics with leadership? How often do you report metrics? Who do you report them to? What's the most impactful way to deliver the data? Ultimately, how are you winning the case for CS? And Clark, we'll start with you.
So I basically package up data and metrics, reports, things like that for my CCO on a weekly basis. He reports that up to our CEO, and that is just a weekly occurrence. I think I have a natural tendency to build really overcomplicated and cool looking graphs that I think are fun to make and they look cool, but ultimately what our leaders want is something that's just really clear, concise, easy to digest, easy to where you could just glance at it and know what's happening. So ditching the cool color schemes and just going for just a classic stoplight colors, things like that are really important, and just keeping things clean. So simplicity, something that is easily digestible, understandable is hugely important. And then just making sure that, I'm not necessarily just emailing a chart or something to leadership, but that I'm actually taking the time to kind of sit down and explain where the data is coming from, what it means, things that I'm seeing that might impact that data, exclusions, exceptions, things like that. It's important that leadership has the knowledge that they need to then convey that to everyone else.
So you're basically translating the data, right? Making
sense. Translating, making sure that they understand, what it is that the chart says, and then they can kind of use that to guide their strategy. But I don't want them to have to interpret what a chart means when, I'm the one in the weeds with the data.
And Adam,
that's one, Clark. I love that. I will say that is a skill that every data RevOps or CS ops needs to hone, which is not just deliver the data, but explain the data in a meaningful way. Okay, so how do I use the data? I agree with Clark. The ops team puts things together, but it's really on my leadership team to know their data. So they work with the ops team, and then every Monday we have what I call just a weekly operational tactical, and every leader, onboarding, CS, renewals, support, operations, they come with 2 slides that are pre-formatted every single week, and they deliver their most impactful data on their departments. They need to know what's going on. And here's one other little tweetable moment, if you will, or whatever, is don't just deliver the news. You need to make the news. And what I mean by that is don't just say things like, churn, we're going to miss our churn target by 2%. Well, that's just delivering the news. Making the news is saying we're going to miss our churn target by 2% because our commercial segment is seeing a higher competitive grab in the past 2 months because of XYZ, or we're going to lose because there are 3 product gaps that we've got to prioritize. That is making news across the organization versus just delivering it. And so I know I'm kind of like being a little bit, I don't know, bold or direct, but I really want every CS leader to be bolder and to be more aggressive in the organization in a way that makes sure that the organization knows what's going on, because their role is so important to the business. So all that to say, every leader should know their data. They should report on it weekly, and they need to deliver the news, or I'm sorry, they need to make the news, not just deliver it.
That was a nice tweetable moment. You're very right. That's that marketing mind coming in, Adam.
I haven't tweeted in like 2 years, but there you go.
Thank you for that. Okay, guys, so we got 5 minutes left. We're going to take some questions. It is Q&A time. So just a reminder, the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, you see a little Q&A box. You can go in and type a question. We have one in from Christopher. I will ask. So he says, I have no background in data, and I recently stumbled into a position in my company to pay attention to and will soon be reporting customer data. I have the attention of our new COO, and it looks like we will be able to collect a lot of customer data soon. For someone very new to this information, what would be the first thing to be paying attention to? Clark, we'll go with you.
Oh man, there's a lot to unpack here. So customer data, I mean, pay attention to, obviously, well, I wouldn't necessarily say customer sentiment, but MRR, churn, things like that. If you're getting product data, use it. Again, be kind of careful with how you're using it, but feature adoption, product insights, like, whether or not you're counting seats or headcount or anything like that. Start collecting and storing that. I would say if you are establishing, goals or objectives in the sales process to be able to actually act on ROI and measure it, that's great. If not, start covering that in things like EBRs, where you're actually going over ROI and communicating with the customer whether or not you're meeting those goals. So start measuring that. Yeah, don't overcomplicate it. I would say is just start getting it somewhere. Don't overcomplicate it. Start, chatting openly about what the data means, and use your team to kind of come up with insights and hypotheses.
Perfect. Anything you want to add, Adam?
In the interest of time, I'll just echo what Clark said.
So we had somebody raise their hand. Haiti, I allowed you to speak now. If you have a question that you would like to ask Clark or Adam, please have at it. If not, we can move on to the next question. I'll give you just a second, Haiti, if you want to unmute yourself.
Haiti may be like, I raised my hand on accident.
And if you raise it on accident, that is totally okay. You can always chat us or put it in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we get your question answered. So we will be moving on. Let's see the next question. At what point in our growth should my organization consider adding a CS ops role? Who wants to take that one? Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I would prioritize an operations person once you have more than 5 or so CSMs, candidly. It's going to be too important. They can be a bit of a hybrid role, or you can have a CSM that has an operations slant to them, but you need someone that's going to start building. I just believe in it that strongly.
Clark, what do you think? You agree, disagree?
Yeah, I think early on, but not too early. At a certain point, I mean, you don't have enough, very early, you don't have enough customers, or there's not enough of a demand for a full-time role. It's kind of probably around 5 CSMs is where you get to a point to where they're each doing a little bit of ops on their own, and then you just kind of pull that into one person. But I would say early on, CS ops is just kind of a part of being a CSM at a small company. So
right.
Early, but not too early.
Early, but not too early. All right. Well, thank you both. We're coming up at the top of the hour here, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If you have a question that you didn't get to get in, we have my email address sitting on here. We have Adam and Clark. You can find them on LinkedIn. But this takes us to the end of our time together, and I want to offer a huge thank you to both of our panelists for taking the time to be with us today and sharing their insights and experience. And I want to give a very special thank you and round of applause for Clark Dixon, who's on day 2 of COVID, but he powered through like a champ. Please keep an eye out for updates, as we're going to be sharing this reporting on social. We're going to be sending it to you guys in an email. And if anyone has customer success topics they want to see UserIQ talk about, please email me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you guys want to hear about. And also, we're switching things up a bit this year. We're going to be doing monthly webinars instead of bi-monthly webinars. We're going to make them shorter so that they're easier to digest throughout your workday. So we look forward to seeing you guys next month. We're going to be talking all things executive business reviews. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon, and thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Clark.
Thank you. See you later, Clark.
Thank you.